hear the terms promoter and producer. What's the difference? I've often wondered about it when it comes to producing or promoting a music community event or a jazz concert. Cincinnati, Ohio resident and Jazz Alive executive director Laura Ann Gentry set the record straight for me on Strictly Jazz Sounds. It's your conversation about all things jazz. Hi, I'm Steve Browngen. In episode 9 of Strictly Jazz Sounds, I spent time with Laura Ann Gentry, president of LAG, or Laura Ann Gentry Productions, LLC. She produces and promotes jazz events in a variety of settings in the greater Cincinnati, Ohio, northern Kentucky, and southeast Indiana area, or better known as the tri-state area. Laura is a singular person in so many ways. She's passionate, she's humorous, and above all, she's an interesting storyteller of her adventures and misadventures as an African-American woman producing jazz events. It's not an easy world for a woman in that industry, let alone an African-American woman, in what has long been considered a man's game. She tells a story of losing her shirt on her first production that featured saxophonist Javon Jackson and NEA jazz master, now deceased organist Dr. Lonnie Smith. Fortunately, Laura had her backup skills of accounting and her other full-time job. She was able to cover the loss and learn a big lesson. Laura Ann Gentry puts in some serious time all day, every day. Her drive and passion put her in the forefront of presenting women jazz musicians in the tri-state area. Laura pursues the proliferation of jazz with purpose. And if that's not enough, she is involved in jazz education as a board member of the Jazz Education Network. And believe me, she has something to say about that. Laura's passion for the music rang very clear throughout the entire discussion. She's very, very passionate. I asked her for the source of her passion. What set this into motion?
My mother loves all music. She could listen to anything: country, rock, folk, bluegrass, blues, jazz, anything. She loved anything. My father was a real jazz head.
I love that term.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, my father was the jazz head. He listened to a lot of traditional bebop, but also loved what they call soul jazz, organ jazz. And I tell people, I heard Charles Erlin so much when I was growing up, I got tired of it. But I've come to appreciate Charles Erlin as I've gotten older.
Has a way of doing that, doesn't it?
Yeah. And both of my parents loved to dance. And that's how they met. And so their love of music and their love of dancing is how they met. And I can remember growing up, I grew up in Middletown, Ohio. They would go every weekend, or try to every weekend, go and hear live jazz somewhere in Cincinnati or Dayton, Ohio. And at that time, back in the 70s and going into the 80s, there was lots of, even in the, I would say maybe later 60s, 70s, and 80s, lots of venues in Cincinnati and Dayton. And they would try to go as much as possible to hear live jazz. So that's the environment that I grew up in, and just, I believe, automatically kind of absorbed that appreciation for music, and specifically for jazz. And growing up, I was always involved in the arts. I started singing when I was 5 years old. I took modern dance and ballet lessons for 10 years, from the age of 5 to 15. I sang in choral groups and choirs and different kind of organized singing groups. So I was always involved in the arts some kind of way. And when I became a promoter, it was kind of, I had a moment of, I was at a crossroads in my life and was trying to figure out what would make me happy. And I needed to be able to figure that out for myself. I need to be the source of my happiness. What will make me happy? And the decision I came to was I needed to get back and be involved in the arts. That kind of started my process in becoming a promoter.
Now you have a degree in accounting, right?
Correct.
And you're currently seeking accounting opportunities.
I actually am employed as an accountant.
You have time for that?
So, yes, I was telling the story the other night. Um, when I was in high school, I was thinking I would do something with my voice after I graduated from high school, either go into broadcast journalism or sing. Um, my father's advice to me was, please come up with something else. Because we want to ensure that you can take care of yourself, um, and
Oh yeah.
you can't come back home. So
Oh,
um,
that was an ultimatum.
I the only other thing that I thought of is maybe that I would go into business some way. And I went to private school, and my high school offered accounting classes. I started taking them in my junior year of high school, and I also took them in my senior year of high school. And when I was in high school, I worked for a little mom and pop grocery store, and the owner's wife took me under her wing and um, worked with me and basically taught me how to do simple bookkeeping. So by the time I graduated from high school, I had a pretty good idea of how to do simple bookkeeping, and I decided to major in accounting when I went to college. And I'm glad I did, because I say, you have a right brain and a left brain, and accounting allows me to expand that part of my brain. Um, and I would be an accountant until probably I die, because there's things about it that I really enjoy. And I feel like that gives that an opportunity for me to keep my brain pushing on all cylinders. So um, I'm currently employed with a company in Cincinnati, Ohio that has global locations, and my responsibility is North America. Um, and I always say that skills are transferable. So I learned a lot as an accountant that I was able to transfer into being a promoter, because a lot of things about being a good promoter is just good project management. And I carry that skill with me from being an accountant into being a promoter. And because I have a finance background, what I normally get is people come to me and ask, can you put together a budget for me? Can you talk to me about how I can do these things financially, and what are my best sources? And so, because I have a finance background, if I'm hired as a promoter or a producer, I can put together a budget. I can come up with a marketing strategy. I can come up with, here's some analysis that we can look at for gains or losses if you're looking at doing this project, you know, a, this way, or maybe we can come up with another financial scenario that's a little better if you want to, if you're just starting out and you don't want to do like a big production, but you want to do a smaller production so you can have some sustainability. So skill sets transfer, and I'm grateful that I have the skill sets that I have that have helped me be a better promoter.
Tell me this. When you tell someone that you produce and promote, how do you explain what you do in simpler terms? I mean, what's the difference between those two? Is there?
To me, there is as a promoter. Um, I consider myself an independent promoter, and that means I promote stuff under Lag Productions independently, and I will assume the financial risk for mounting an event. Um, and I assume all of the responsibilities for promotion and coordinating logistics for artists and negotiating contracts. I do all of that. And as a promoter, I do all of that under Lag Productions, and I assume all the risks. As a producer, I could be hired to be a producer, and I do all of that, but the financial resources to support mounting the event is from sponsors or other entities that have their own funding. So I could be hired as a producer, and I don't assume any financial risk. I'm doing more coordinating the talent, operations, and logistics. So I do believe that there's a difference.
So when Lag takes it on, um, you assume the full brunt of the fiduciary responsibilities of it.
Correct.
But when you are hired, another company is taking that on, but they're asking you to do the work.
Yes. So, for example, I was hired by Cincinnati Parks to do summer concert series. And
Yeah, that's a good example.
I worked for Cincinnati Parks for about 5 years doing summer concert series in two of the biggest parks in greater Cincinnati, Smale Park, which is on the banks of the Ohio River, and Washington Park, which is in the Over the Rhine community in downtown Cincinnati, right across the street from Music Hall. And we would coordinate summer series all summer long. And for a couple of years, I had both of those parks going at the same time all summer.
Ooh. And you still had your job.
Yeah, yeah, and I still was working a full-time job too.
Handling North America.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
So,
just trying. I'm trying to put it in perspective here.
so when I say good project management is a great skill to have, it is. It allows for you to have a vision about something and see it in full scale, and then also execute it, manage it, and coordinate it and execute it accordingly. So I'm because I'm an accountant, I'm really anal about details and being organized. So I if someone comes to me like Cincinnati Parks and they say we want to do a summer series, the first and I find out the location, like for example, Smale Park sits right next door to Great American Ballpark, which is the home of the Cincinnati Reds. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the Red schedule as soon as it's published and see when they're playing home games and figure out, is that a conflict with us?
Yeah.
So I start from there. I start trying to organize and look at dates. And then if I know how many dates I have available to me, then I can start to come up with ideas for talent. And then I always come up with 3 scenarios if I can. I call them A, B, and C. A is like your A-list game. You know, if I had a choice of the people that are some really well-known national and international jazz acts, that would be on my A list. B would kind of be my middle ground. C would be, the lowest that I could do, maybe based on my budget. 9 times out of 10, when I put those scenarios together, we normally land at B. And even then, you have to be able to calibrate if things change with final funding that comes in. So in those scenarios, Cincinnati Parks had to go out and get the funding. And that funding is ultimately inclusive of my fee to do this service. And I put together a budget for them. And I say, here are the dates, here are the acts, here's what I need for band fee, accommodations, travel, backline, any tech needs, hospitality, and my fee. And then we also try to determine, we're an outdoor series, so do we need contingency plans in place for inclement weather? Is there cost associated with that? So I put in potential costs associated with, are we going to have something that we have to do to move if we have inclement weather? And once I put that all together and present it, then it's yay or nay. And sometimes if it's nay, we have to go back and recalibrate.
Sure.
Um, that's project management,
Yeah.
um, and understanding what is needed, to mount a series in that manner.
That's very well explained. Let's talk about several of the organizations that you're involved with. We Create Jazz. Are you still involved with that?
Yes, I am. So I'm president of an organization called Jazz Alive, and Jazz Alive is a nonprofit that is our mission is to preserve and present jazz, the original American art form. We have 6 initiatives that advance our mission. One of them is We Create Jazz, which is focused on women in jazz. It was actually an idea that stemmed from the University of Cincinnati Conservatory of Music and their concern about the numbers that they had in their school for their jazz studies program, the number of women that they had in the jazz studies program, and
Or
how,
the lack thereof?
or lack thereof, correct, in their bachelor's and graduate programs, and how that could change. And the director of jazz studies came to me and said, I'd like to be able to do something focused on women that can be sustainable year over year, um, that we can actually help this idea on 3 things: performance, education, and mentoring. And in 2019, we executed We Create Jazz kind of in a full scale model in March and April. March is Women History Month, April is Jazz Appreciation Month.
Yeah,
And
good tie-in. I like that.
we did a series of things in both of those months focused on women in jazz with local, regional, and national artists. We presented Diva Jazz Orchestra. We had women artists that came in and worked with schools in Cincinnati public schools and in suburban schools and um, at the University of Cincinnati with master classes and clinics and performances. And just to be able to convey the message about non-genderization of instruments, understanding that if being a jazz musician is your path and your truth, that you need to walk in it. And as women, sometimes we don't get the messaging that is inspiring to us to continue that journey. And hopefully, what we do with We Create Jazz gives that positive messaging for women and young girls to continue if that's what they want to do. And to also, and I'm involved with other organizations and we're trying to do more focus on women in jazz. I also tell women, um, create your own opportunities as opposed to waiting for people to call you
Yeah.
or waiting for people to offer things to you. Create your own. Because at the end of the day, that's kind of what I did. And women will talk about the lack of getting called, the lack of getting opportunities. And I stress there's only so much of the you can say. You need to take that energy and focus it on creating your own opportunities, creating your own atmosphere of what you want to do. And when you do that, you can bring other women in and bring other women up, in this idea. And sometimes I'm an African American woman, so there's a dichotomy there of race and gender.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to create your own things and speak at the table if you're invited, and if you're not invited to the table, build your own table.
Build your own table. That's exactly right. I like what Terry Lynn Carrington said. What would jazz without patriarchy sound like?
Yeah, and I think she's done a wonderful thing in really pushing this idea forward because we understand, and I think she understands very well. She's dealing with the next generation of jazz musicians, and in that is young women, young women of color, um, trans, young people who are trans or non-binary,
Non-binary.
right? And they're all trying to make sure that they find a place and have a place. And that needs to be considered as we go forward, not only in life in general, the consideration of those who may be disregarded, but in the arts especially.
I know Javon Jackson, and Javon is now, my understanding is, the director of jazz studies at the Jackie McLean Institute
Jackie McLean Institute,
at the
yes.
University of Hartford.
Hmm.
You're saying he gave you a lot of advice
He
and
did.
to try to promote jazz, and you said, ironically, everything he said came true. What came true?
So I met Javon when he was playing with Elvin Jones' Jazz Machine,
Yeah.
and he is the very first person that I said out loud to, I want to be a jazz promoter. So I'll tell you, I went to, it was a caravan of us from Cincinnati that drove to Dayton to Jilly's Jazz Club to see Elvin Jones' Jazz Machine.
Oh, that was exciting, I bet.
And I went for the first set with a group of friends. And a couple of my friends was like, hey, we're going to go backstage and say hi to Elvin. Come with us. So I go backstage to the green room, and I'm backstage and I'm kind of standing off in the corner. And the reason why I'm standing off in the corner is because I am the only woman in that green room. And there
Oh,
was probably a
I
good
see.
maybe 20 or 30 men
Yeah.
standing back there.
That must have felt really intimidating.
So I was standing over, leaning up against the wall, kind of away from everybody. And Javon actually came over to me like, what are you doing here? Do you work for the club? And I said, no, I actually am here because my friends recommended that I come, even though I knew of Elvin Jones. I had never heard him live. And I said, I'm thinking about promoting jazz. And he looked at me and he said, do you live here? I said, I live in Cincinnati. And he said, are you staying for the second set? And I said, I don't have tickets for the second set. And he went and spoke with Mr. Gelati, the owner. And he said, I'd like this young lady to be my guest for the second set. And he said, I want to talk to you about what you just said. And that evening after the second set, we sat in the club until it closed. And he said to me, you're an African American woman and you want to promote jazz in the Midwest. Are you sure you want to do this?
He knew something, didn't he?
Yeah. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, let me just give you a few pointers. There's probably nobody in your area that you can look to for a mentor that's doing what you want to do. You're going to go into this figuring it out on your own. I said, well, that much I know. And he said, and people who you thought were your friends are probably going to show that they're not your friends once you start doing this. The people that you expect to support you probably won't. And you're going to have a lot of haters if you do this and you have any measure of success, especially men. And all of those things that he said came true.
That sounds pretty dismal, but yet you moved forward anyway.
Yeah. And with the things that he said that came true were the horrible things, and they were painful for me. But the one thing that he said, you're going to have haters, and they're probably going to be men. And that was very true, especially in the beginning. But what I learned, my father was a police officer. I'm very lucky that I was raised by a police officer. Um, he he would always say to me, if somebody doesn't like you, that's their problem. It's not yours. If somebody is jealous of you or they hate on you because of what you're doing and you're maybe successful at it in some way, it's their problem. It's not yours. Keep doing what you do at the best level that you can do it. Let them deal with their own situation, but it's not your problem. And I had to take that to heart when I lost friends, when I thought the people that were be supporting me and come out to my shows and events didn't. Um, but then what I found is that there were people that didn't know me that just appreciated what I did as a promoter and loved coming to my events because they enjoyed themselves and they heard the music that they wanted to hear. They became my supporters. Um, my first really big show that I did as a promoter was Javon Jackson, Dr. Lonnie Smith, Idris Muhammad, and Dave Stryker. I did a weekend with them,
Oh, good show.
and I tell you what, it killed me. It was the first time that I really had that level of artists that I was dealing with and learning all the things that I needed to learn about dealing with that. And then all of the things that were coming at me because there were people that had ulterior motives because they saw that I was bringing in this group. So there were a lot of people pulling at me. And those people pulling at me had some ulterior motives and their own agendas. And so I learned a lot that weekend in doing that show. And one of the things that I learned up is to continue to stand up for myself. Because there was a moment where I was hesitating about confronting someone about someone, and Javon stepped in and literally read this person the riot act.
Oh,
And if you don't know Javon, he has a side of him where he will slice your throat.
no, I didn't see that side of Javon.
Right. And he basically defended me and kind of tore this person up, you know. And then he told me, he said, don't forget to stand up for yourself. Don't forget to do that. And so after I got through that weekend, you know, he asked me, he said, I know this was tough for you and you kind of got your ass kicked, so to speak. And he said, but after that, are you willing to get up and do it again? And without hesitation, I said, yeah, I am. And he said, well, that tells you what you're made of. If you get tore up and then you get up and say, you can go down, but you don't have to stay down. If you get back up and say, I'm going to do this again, that tells you what you're made of. And I got up with hesitation and said, yeah, I'm going to do it again. But then after everything kind of calmed down, and I told this story Monday night. I'm in Kroger's grocery store, standing in the deli line, and a couple comes up to me and they say, hey, aren't you the jazz lady that did this event last weekend? That was so great. When do you have something else coming? We had so much fun. When do you have something else coming up? And that was gratitude and appreciation that I needed to hear from somebody who didn't know me at all. They just heard about my event and they came and patronized.
And that worked for you.
I did. But you know what? I can recover from that because I still get up and I go to work as an accountant. And it's like I learned a lot of lessons that I will now take forward with me on what to do and what not to do. Sometimes you have to get beat up to learn some lessons. You take those lessons with you. You have to take them with you and learn from them and utilize that information that you have gotten going forward.
Let me ask, what's the jazz climate? like in the greater Cincinnati area. Is it? Are you happy with it? Um, does it? Do you think it needs to be changed? Share that with me. What's going on?
Well, I've been promoting for 24 years, and I would say there's things that have improved, and there's still things there's always continuous improvement that is needed. We need more venues. Um, and when I say that, um, dedicated jazz venues, not just restaurants or hotels or
Yeah, yeah,
locations like that that have jazz, which is great because that's opportunities for musicians to work. But venues that are dedicated to presenting jazz, and that's their first and foremost of what they do. We don't have enough of those. Um, the Blue West
jazz
Jazz,
clubs.
yeah, the Blue West Jazz Club was in existence in Cincinnati for over 40 years, I believe, and closed down in, I believe, 2016. The one club that we have that is dedicated to presenting, and that's their focus, is Cafe Vivace. It's a smaller venue, but it's one of the best options that we have for that type of atmosphere. But there are restaurants and even in the hotel lounges in downtown and other places um, that have live jazz. And again, those are opportunities for musicians to work, and that's great. Sports Point is another dedicated jazz venue. It's a smaller venue, only maybe about 40 capacity of 40 in Sports Point. Um, and so I would like to see more venues like Jilly's in Dayton. Jilly's was a 250 seat capacity venue, and it was the whole entire focus was presenting live jazz, live music, yeah, jazz or blues. Um, it would be nice,
That's substantial.
yeah. And Mr. Gelati, I probably 40 or 50 years that he had Jilly's over 3 locations in Dayton. Um, and the venue closed down after he died. And that's the other thing is that the the idea of somebody picking up the mantle and being able to carry on with what he did has not happened. So I would like to see more venues in my region, and I would like to see more of musicians working more diversely with each other. We still have a scenario in Cincinnati where we have black and white musicians, and they don't necessarily support and work with each other as much as they can um, for antiquated reasons, and also women musicians who, again, are not intersected into the scene as much as they could be. So I encourage them, create your own, create your own opportunities, create your own thing. That is something that bothers me more so than us not having as many venues as I would like to see. That we still have a segregation of musicians with race and gender.
You know, I asked Sonny Rollins and McCoy Tyner about their thoughts regarding the lack of diversity in their audiences. I mean, you can see it when you go to a show. It's now I've seen some difference here in Columbus, particularly with A Tribe for Jazz.
Uh-huh.
Both of these guys thought educating students about jazz was essential. What's your take on that as a board member of the Jazz Education Network?
It's not just students or children that need to be educated about jazz. It's everybody because jazz is an original American art form, but it is also history. And there are roots of jazz in, I believe, all genres of music. And the cultural value and the importance of that needs to be proliferated to not only children and students, but adults too. Because what I have found with with educational outreach is people always think educational outreach is for kids, and I'm like, there's lots of adults that need that need exposure too.
Yes, that is correct. A lot of exposure. They don't understand it. Um, I have, what I hear, and I'm certain you hear the same thing. Jazz is dead. Um, or there are no young people involved in jazz.
And that's not true.
And that is definitely not true.
And or that jazz is elitist, you know.
That's right. And if you like something, if you don't like smooth jazz, but you like the other jazz, the real jazz, as well, some of us call it, um, and as Mark Ruffin calls it, in real jazz, but it is an art form that encompasses a wide variety of tastes, and then it does involve a whole lot of young people. I just did an interview with Emmanuel Wilkins. We talked about what he coined was a renaissance of young musicians, especially those who are being signed to major labels, such as he is, to Blue Note. Him, Joel Ross, James Francis. I mean, a whole bunch of them are out there. Are you seeing this as well?
I see. Well, you know what? I don't think there's never been a time as my time promoting that I haven't seen. I don't know if I would call it a renaissance. I've always seen generations of people. I've been promoting for 24 years, and there's people that I work with now that are in their late 30s, and I can remember when they were at CCM. You know, I've always seen different generations of people coming up through jazz here and in other areas. And I think that's why I say jazz isn't dead, because I still see generations of musicians coming through. And that is important that those generations still come through and understand not only the importance of the tradition, because you need the tradition as your foundation, but people like Emmanuel and others of his generation that understand the tradition, but also understand how they can bring their unique qualities to jazz. Um, it is still something that we need to work. It's still work. I tell people, I feel like there's days when I'm always fighting for jazz, and I still feel like we will be fighting for jazz, and it's always work that needs to be done for exposure. And when I people might look at me and think I'm a successful promoter. I'm successful at what I do. I don't really know if I'm successful. And I've been asked the question, well, why are you still in Cincinnati, Ohio? Why don't you go somewhere like Chicago or New York or a bigger metropolitan city? And I'm like, because what I see the need is here, and even in rural areas around me. Trumpeter Sean Jones and we've talked about educational outreach in rural areas about jazz and how there is more of that can be done for exposure. And I've done some of that in Southeast Ohio and Northeast Kentucky and in Huntington, West Virginia. And that is very important to me because it was one of the most grateful things that I can have the experience in is seeing a person, either a student or an adult, hear a jazz tune and you see the enjoyment on your face. You see the they get it on their face, and it's something that they've never been exposed to. Um, we still need that. And for Jazz Education Network, I think we are now in a scenario with our board that we understand the importance of that, and we understand the importance of how do we get the information out for more exposure for not only students and adults. How do we do more for an audience or demographic that is not just educators? Because I'm not an educator, but I came onto the board and talked about that idea of Jen needs to do more for people who are non-educators. Um, how do we provide more representation when it comes to gender and race? We need to be on the forefront of doing that going forward. And I think we now are in a scenario with the board, with the people that we have, that we get it and we need to execute on it.
Sean Jones is still the chair, right?
Actually, Sean just stepped down. His term as president was ended last year. Lonnie Davis, who is the director of Jazz Arts in Charlotte, North Carolina, she is our current president.
The industry itself, do you think that it has survived the pandemic pretty well? Do you think it's back? Where do you see it right now?
Well, I think the one thing with the impact of the pandemic is there were venues that were lost, and I think the biggest thing that bothers me the most about what happened with the pandemic is the loss of venues. I was just speaking about this the other night about how the pandemic showed us all how we had to pivot, how we had to be able to learn maybe new skill sets and figure out how to do things as performing artists or those who support the performing arts, how we can do things to save our audiences, so to speak. And I think that's the biggest impact that I've seen. I think artists, with the help of the community of artists, learned how to be able to pivot and still present their art. Um, but the loss of venues, it's questionable whether or not that type of thing will recover. Um, and when you lose a jazz venue, it's like, okay, the venue is gone, but the building is still there, and somebody comes in, and you hope it'll be a jazz club again, but it's probably not going to be a jazz club again. So it's like if you lose the venue, it's gone forever.
It's not just a venue; it's simply another place where jazz is no longer.
Right, and it is no longer.
I have, in my experience, I have seen so many people who have an expectation that when they get their music, when they go to see music, that it's going to be free of charge. Organizations have grants, you know what I'm talking about. And people want to go or have a low charge. And what I would say to people is, these are professional musicians. These are professionals. When you go to the dentist, you don't expect to get it for free.
Exactly. You use a good example that I use.
Is that right? But it's true. It is true. You need that.
Yeah, musicians
That's right.
provide a service, and if they're professionals, they need to be paid accordingly. But I try not to get upset about that mindset of I should be able to go somewhere and hear music for free. I try not to get upset about that, because what I have learned is that there are communities that probably don't have an outlet for exposure to the arts and may not be able to go to clubs or go to venues and pay the prices. So I always, when I look at the landscape of how programming is done, from my standpoint as a president of a nonprofit, it's like, what can we do to help level some of this playing field to provide an outlet for communities that may not have an opportunity to go hear music? What can we do? So, um, my organization, Jazz Alive, we do a free concert series in June. I work with another organization that we do a free concert series in July. And then there's another organization that I work with that does a free concert series in August. So in the summer, we have a lot of opportunities to present where an outdoor series allows your entire community to come and participate in appreciation of the arts. And that kind of programming always needs to be considered across the landscape. One thing that I know the pandemic taught us is that communing with each other is it's part of our humanity. And people communing in appreciation of the arts is important in that idea. There is energy transferred in commune between the audience and the artist. And that is something that is part of our humanity and much needed. And even though there were things that we were able to pivot to during the pandemic, that still allowed us to present that element of commune with people in person, and that exchange of energy is greater when you do that in person. So when we were able to, one scenario where we had a drought, we couldn't do any outdoor things, and then we finally did an outdoor event in September of 2021, I think, and people came out came out in droves because they were hungry. And it was like literally hungry.
Oh yeah.
To be able to have that experience, and it was a free outdoor event. It was a BYOB. We told people bring your own bottle of what you enjoy, bring a picnic,
Yeah.
bring a chair, come out. It was kind of like a pop up, and I had more people that came than I expected, but everyone came up. The people who came up to me to speak with me said, "Thank you for having this. This is really great.
Oh,
We really
they were
wanted to be.
hungry.
We really want. Yeah, we went." And I think people are still hungry. There's people who are still cautious because COVID is not going away.
It's not over.
It's never going to be over. It's never going to be. I don't think it's ever going to be over. And so people are still cautious, but they still want to be able to commune with others, especially in appreciation of something that they enjoy. So a venue is a business, and so they have to operate as a business to be able to continue to make money and present. But programming, I always feel like if you look at the landscape of programming, you need to provide something that takes the art to where the people are so they can be exposed to it and have access to it.
And that's really that takes place in the summertime a whole lot in a lot of communities.
Yes.
And then this is where so many of the funding organizations are encouraging local communities to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know that Columbus Arts created a fee that is added to the cost of the show in the greater Columbus area. Is that a fair thing to do? You think that's a good thing?
Well, I would say I'm sure that they probably had reasoning behind why they did that, because we all deal, even if you're a nonprofit, we all deal with inflation, um, and being able to cover costs for what you do, um, and make yourself sustainable. And sometimes that means you have to go with how do we do this thing with a cover charge, um, and I would never disagree with any entity that feels like that's what they have to do, because they know themselves about what do they need to do to survive. But hopefully the other side of that is they balance, and they have a balance of what they do with free programming. Um, Not a venue can't potentially do that. A nonprofit entity, even with Jazz Live, we have events that we do where we charge a cover. But I always try to look at a balance of, can I do the concert series free? Yes. I just have to work on finding the funding to make sure that we do that, because I think it's important.
Laura Ann Gentry gave a brief rundown of events in the greater Cincinnati area in which she is involved during the coming months. Cafe Vivace in Cincinnati features prominently in her jazz site recommendations. Saxophonist Antonio Hart will be appearing with the Dan Carlsberg Trio in June, and she is producing the show. Xavier University has a music series that runs through May, and Jazz Alive will be presenting free live jazz for the community to enjoy every Wednesday in June and July, and on Thursdays in August. So read the podcast information for who is involved and where to attend. Thanks to Bruce Halliburton for the introduction to Laura Ann Gentry, and thanks to Johannes Wallman for the theme music, McCoy, which can be found on his album Precarious Towers on Paradigm Records. And share this podcast with family and friends, and let them know they can catch this podcast at their favorite podcast provider. Or go to the Strictly Jazz Sounds Facebook page and follow it there. If you have a minute, please share your thoughts about this show. I can only do better. And if you would like to be a sponsor, please contact me through my website, strictlyjazzsounds.com. Future episodes include pianist Jonathan Avishai and saxophonist and Arabagast record label owner John Arabagon. Subscribe so you can receive future episodes in your email and be informed about any new writings and jazz doings that I provide. And please join my Facebook group, Jazz Enthusiast, by searching for it and requesting to join. Support live jazz wherever you are. Thank you for listening. This is Strictly Jazz Sounds. I'm Steve Browngen.